AI is always going to be in our docket. It's super exciting, but this week it's kind of been safety, disruption, some naughty distillation from the Chinese open source models. Starting with safety, Anthropic was founded specifically to be the safe alternative to OpenAI. This week, it updated its responsible scaling policy to say it will no longer delay AI development if it lacks a significant lead over competitors, which basically means safety is now conditional. Your XAI has agreed to an all lawful purposes standard, which is a nice, broad blanket statement. Grok is now cleared for classified intelligence, which scares the living bejesus out of me. Weapons development and battlefield operations. The Pentagon has threatened to brand Anthropic a supply chain risk if it won't lift all safeguards. So a lot is happening on this kind of safety piece. Mads, can you kick off this little bit?
Well, I think it ties in very well to what we've just talked about, which is that existential threats change context and that change beliefs. Now, we'll remember Google in 2018, they had this discussion about Project Maven, which was a kind of defense and intelligence project from the US government at the time, where Google employees pressured the company to basically give that up and say, well, we're not going to do it. We're not going to support these things. Now, 4 years later, ChatGPT appears. Suddenly people thought Google might disappear overnight and OpenAI might take their business. And then today, Google has major Department of Defense contracts, and kind of the existential threats completely rewire that moral calculus. And it's sort of, I think, a little bit of an analogy to what's happened in Europe, right? It was a time going back 10 years when we thought, listen, we are so rich and so wealthy, and all the rest of the world, the Americans, they're kind of also wealthy, but the rest of the world is just developing economies and they'll never catch up. And we can sit here and just sort of think about our regulation and how to be good human beings and not worry too much about competing too hard because nobody can catch us. And suddenly things become a lot more existential, and we're reminded that actually there are some of these survival things that do need to go to the top of the priority stack, because if we forget that, well, it's going to be a whole different conversation we need to have. And now this week, the same has happened to Anthropic. And that's no different from what happened to OpenAI previously. Now, OpenAI, they opened out as wanting to be an open company and develop AI to the benefit of humanity. And suddenly they worked out that they were probably on the trail of $1 trillion valuation in a massive company. And all the stakes changed and the calculus changed. And Anthropic is now probably in the same place. They started as a safety first company, but suddenly they have these pressures from all these sides, right? On one hand, you've got the Pentagon, the ultimatum. You had Chinese open source models. The Chinese is possibly distilling on Anthropic's models. And you've got, all these, the new DeepSeek model that's coming out this month. Sounds like it possibly has been trained on black whales that have been smuggled in, right? So on one hand, you start out having all these good intentions, but then reality catches up with you. And, some people will say it's a tragedy. I think it's human nature. When the context changes and we're under these pressures, then the value, the moral compass can change and evolve. And I think that's sort of possibly what's happening here.
It's sad though, isn't it, really, that we're going to end up with this. I find it sad. I know that we're trying to be pragmatic as well as think from the human angles, but it's just feels like we're just taking 10 steps backwards with all this nonsense. But Lomax, you've got some notes on this point as well, haven't you?
Well, no, I'm just like, it's probably no coincidence that probably only a few weeks after you've announced a new $30 billion fundraising round, that you're now stripping back the guardrails from your AI, right? I think it's, call me cynical. And then in regards to the specific point around Anthropic and the DoD, which was that, Anthropic was selling it at the only LLM model company before Grok, as you mentioned, with a contract into the US DoD for $200 million a year, I think it is, no? And Hegseth has basically said they had two restrictions. One is that the models could not be used in the development of autonomous systems used for offensive purposes, basically without a human in the loop. So drones or autonomous systems that would kill people automatically, or for surveillance of the local population or of the US population. And they were kind of restrictions on the use of the Anthropic model. And Hegseth basically got very aggressive and said, if you don't take those out by, I think it's Friday this week, you guys are out. In fact, not
Mm.
only are you out, but
You're a risk.
you're a risk. Yeah, you're deemed to be the same level as any kind of Chinese corporate that could be in a supply chain. So very aggressive stance. So for me, that one, I'm like, well, to be honest, Anthropic, if you want to sell software to the US DoD, that's like, you can't kind of have your cake and eat it. That's a very, very clear one to me. It's like, you can't sell into the US DoD, especially at the moment, what's going on in the White House. Like, what did you expect?
Yeah.
And then again, you raise 30 billion. I don't think the investors in that round are going to be happy for you operating with a bit of a handbrake on when your competitors aren't. So I'm
But
just
it'll
not
be worse
surprised.
than
I know
Max, won't it? It'll be worse
I know you
because you
call
know
it
that
sad, Dan, but it's just pure cold-hearted, like commercial
I
reality.
know, but we've got to be
You know who'll be
humans as
sadder.
well.
You'll know who'll be sadder than you, Dan. Rishi Sunak, who launched the AI Safety Summit. In one of his biggest legacies as a prime minister was,
Yeah.
you'll remember at Bletchley Park 2 years ago.
I do. I remember it well.
What happened to
And
that
then
thing? Does that even exist anymore? I think it moved to Paris. I have no idea.
nothing to see here. Move along, please. No, nothing to see here. Yeah. Yeah. Well,
so Paul Rishi
usual.
is like, having his legacy eaten away at again. Anyway, so I'm just not surprised.
No, very quickly on your Mads, you raised the Anthropic accusing Chinese labs of distillation. So Anthropic identified 24,000 fraudulent accounts and 16 million exchanges used by DeepSeek, Moonshot, and Minimax, the Chinese open source models, to train their own models. So there is industrial scale distillation going on, which kind of makes me think, well, that's possibly how it's just going to roll. For the Americans spend all this money, the Chinese say thank you very much. They take all these amazing toolkits and build their own open source models from it. So one quick question for you, Mads, is at what point is that a national security issue? I know Trump's going to Beijing soon, isn't he? I mean, at what point is that a conversation piece between him and Xi Jinping, or will it just be left, do you think?
I think IP theft is always a national security issue.
Yeah.
I mean, stealing somebody's IP is no different from stealing goods, right? If you walk into another man's store and take his stuff and walk out, I mean, that's a huge issue. If you walked into another country and you start to take their assets and steal them and take them away, that's a huge thing. And when it becomes big enough, yes, it becomes a national security issue. So of course it's an issue. The question is what you do about it.
Won't he roll over? Won't Trump roll over just to try and do a deal?
Well, it depends on what the deal is. But I think with some of the stuff, some spillage is going to happen. The question is, how do you create a system where there's enough mutual respect that you can keep it, you can manage it. If it's all one way, then yes, it's a huge issue. If you have massive global trade imbalances, it's much easier to steal IP than to steal goods. So if the people that are making the goods, they get paid in hard cash, and the people that are making the IP have their IP stolen, that is going to create global destabilization. That's not going to work.
I just wonder, as Anthropic on flavor of the month, positive flavor of the month in the White House, I wonder what kind of conversation they'll be having behind the scenes that will make any difference to Trump. And it looks like, correct me if I'm wrong, gents, but it looks like the overall tariff rate with China has come down. So it feels like Trump is almost on a little bit of a back foot and trying to make nice and going and doing state visits. So
well, the problem was they figured out that China has got such a chokehold on the supply chain for U.S. defense.
Yeah. So I don't know. I guess it will just kind of maybe be ignored for now.